tiny, fluffy owls, large, soaring California condors, red-tailed hawks that some use to hunt upland game. It may surprise you to learn that these are all birds of prey, also nicknamed raptors, that can be found in Utah. You've probably seen some of these birds, but there's likely a lot you don't know about these fine feathered friends. This is Wild, a Utah Division of Wildlife Resources podcast. I'm your host, Faith Heaton-Jolly, and this is episode 13, Sky Raptors. Welcome back to the Wild Podcast. I am here today with Russ Norvell. He is our DWR Avian Conservation Program Coordinator. And as you can tell, we're again wearing masks. So there's a lot of Darth Vader breathing. And I feel like I'm running underwater, kind of. So just bear with us. Yeah, Russ is kind of our bird genius. That's how I refer to him. He's rolling his eyes at me. So Russ, let's have you talk about, so how long have you worked for the division?
I've worked for the division since 1997, just after finishing my master's degree, and I would not call myself a bird genius. I think I know enough about birds to know that I don't know everything, that's for sure.
See, spoken like a genius, though. And since you've been at the division, have you been in the same position the whole time?
Oh, no. I've changed positions quite often. I started off as working for the Heritage Program, and soon after that worked into a field position, and then crew leader, and then a program manager, and kind of worked my way up from there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Now I'm the coordinator of the program for non-game bird conservation.
That's awesome. So you started at the bottom and you worked your way up. You've been here that long.
I've done a lot of these different jobs.
Which is cool because you have the on-the-ground, like working in the field experience with a lot of this, as well as research and everything in between. So as you all may have guessed from the introduction, today we're going to be talking about raptors. That's kind of the generic term, I guess, right? Use air quotes for that. So, Russ, what exactly is a quote-unquote raptor, and what are some of kind of the main characteristics that define these types of birds?
So, raptor is a kind of a loose term that we use for most birds of prey, just generally speaking. Most people understand these to be eagles, hawks, and owls. It's
like birds that are eating some type of meat or other animal.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It's a loose term, though, and so it's not really doesn't have the kind of biological specificity that we use typically in conservation exactly.
Sure.
But it's a useful term, like seagulls or something.
Sure.
In that same sense. Yeah, there's a number of species that kind of do and don't fit the category a little bit when you start, drilling down into the details. Things like loggerhead shrikes are actually a different kind of bird. They're called a passerine bird, and yet have a very similar lifestyle. They'll go out and hunt and kill prey, for sure. And then you've got other species like, let's say, osprey, that we think of as a raptor, but we don't think of pelicans as raptors, even though they also eat fish. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And you said there's also some that are considered, or they're classified as raptors, I guess, but they don't even eat meat necessarily. They do more eat like bugs and stuff like that.
Sure. A flammulated owl is a tiny nocturnal insectivorous owl that is entirely just eats insects, pretty much. And they're technically a raptor, but they, technically, in actuality, pretty much only eat moths.
Interesting.
For the most part. Yeah.
So generally they eat meat, but they don't always have to eat meat to be like termed as a raptor.
Sure. It's a loose but useful term.
Yeah. Okay. And do most of them, I guess one of their characteristics, because a lot of them are targeting mice and other animals like that, they tend to have like the big talons, I guess is what they call them. I was about to say claws, but I'm like, that's not the right term.
Right, different group. Yeah, they have talons for the most part.
Okay.
And that's a good, also loose, depending on how formal you want to try and get with the term.
Sure.
You can add on qualifiers like needs talons or hooked bill, but not all birds that we consider to be raptors have those features. So,
gotcha.
Again, it's a loose but useful term, I think.
Interesting. Okay. So given that, how many of those types of bird species do we have here in Utah?
Again, depends a little bit on who you ask, but
sure.
Asking me, I think there's right around 35 have been ever seen in Utah, and about 27 of those species actually breed here.
Okay,
so
interesting.
Quite a few. It's a very diverse group.
And some of them are just passing through, migrating, whatever.
Yep, they're the once in a once in a while, once in a great while, once in a decade kind of species that have been recorded passing through.
So you've got your work cut out for you because you're trying to study and keep track of all these types of species.
Sure.
Plus more. You do even more than just the raptors.
Yep. There's about 465 roughly species that have ever been seen in Utah, and about 231 breed here. So of those, only about 27 species are breeding raptors.
So of these raptors that we do have or that we can see in Utah, what would you say are kind of the most commonly seen ones that somebody might recognize or, kind of be familiar with already?
Sure. I think the two are the most common birds, at least in the rural areas, will be red-tailed hawks, and they are ubiquitous. They are a remarkably plastic species that breeds from the boreal forest up in the Arctic all the way down to the tropical rainforest of Central America. It's really a tremendously adaptable species.
Okay. Is that what you mean by plastic?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They're just very generic.
They're good generalists. They can eat lots of things, and their hunting styles is adaptable to lots of different kinds of prey.
And those, I about to say, I know that I have seen red-tailed hawks. Where typically can you see those throughout Utah?
Probably the easiest place to see on most telephone poles along most roads and highways. They're a perch hunter, so they tend to find a good spot where they've got good sight lines around them, typically in some kind of grassland or shrubland, some open space where they've got a good sight line and flight path. And that's where they'll hunt from. They love our infrastructure for that reason.
That makes sense. What would you say is another fairly common species that people might see in Utah or might recognize?
Yeah, in more urban areas, I think one of the more common species now, getting to be, are Cooper's hawks. They are increasingly found in urban areas like parks and green strips and wooded backyards even. And they're, again, they're quite adaptable and have found it quite useful to move into urban areas where they're hunting, squirrels and mice and rats and things too.
I see.
As well as birds. They'll also take birds on the wing, and they'll happily poach your bird feeder.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I was about to say, I do think my mother-in-law said she's lost a couple chickens to different hawk species. So
a lot of raptors do have old names. Some of them are things like chicken hawk or marsh hawk. They have old terminologies that go back to before we'd come up with more formal names for things.
Between these two, so the Coopers and the red-tailed hawk, what are the differences? Like, how could somebody looking at them visually, how would you be able to tell them apart?
Well, red-tailed hawks are one of the largest hawks certainly in Utah, but also in North America. Quite a large, broad wingspan. They always have a dark leading edge. It's called a patagial, no matter what color morph they are. But red-tails are found, as I said, from the Arctic to the tropics, and there are many different color variations of those. Even though it's the same species, and it does interbreed with it all the way through that range, it's not a consistent color pattern, I guess you'd say. There are dark morphs and light morphs, dark kinds and light kinds.
So even though they are called red-tailed, they don't necessarily have to be reddish colored.
Well, mostly the tail is fairly consistent.
It is? Okay.
Yeah, the tail's brownish on juveniles, and it turns red as they become sexually mature adults.
I guess describe what the Cooper's hawk looks like.
Yeah, it's in a different group. It's called an accipiter. And there are 3 accipiters that we have in Utah, primarily. They sort of a papa mama baby bear kind of idea.
Okay.
The goshawk, northern goshawk, the Cooper's hawk, and the sharp-shinned hawk is the smallest of those 3. They are birds of the forest. They have a differently shaped wing. They don't do much soaring. They do much more powered flight, and they are fast and maneuverable, and they're built for speed, really. They have a glide path like a rock. Yeah.
That's awesome. No, that's super cool. Yeah, I was about to say, I probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between them just looking at them, but I feel like I have seen, I think, some red-tailed hawks around Utah.
You've probably seen them, both of them, a lot more than you know. It's just a matter of taking a moment to stop and look. Accipiters have a typical kind of a T shape to them when in flight, too, and they often have a characteristic wing flapping pattern. So it's sometimes said that if you can distinguish between the sharp-shinned hawk and a Cooper's hawk, which are pretty hard by plumage, by their feathers, but if you can count the number of wing beats if you can go flap, 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 glide, flap, 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 glide, if you can count those, it's probably a Cooper's hawk. If it's too fast to count, like flap, 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 your lips get all tangled up, it's probably a sharp-shin.
Oh, interesting.
But that's not a hard and fast rule, obviously.
Interesting. See, no, I had no idea. Let's talk about some other species that are kind of less common to see in Utah. Yeah, what are some of those that people may not see, but that are also here in the state?
I'd say there's probably 2 kinds of birds that are hard to see in some sense. There's the rarities that are here just once in a great while. Let's say
That just migrate through type of thing.
either migrate through or they're escaping some inclement weather in their wintering areas. Like snowy owls will have an eruptions years when their prey base crashes and the weather's terrible. They'll often move south, and sometimes they'll come far enough south that they'll actually show up in Utah, which is pretty far south for them. And then there's the species that are here, probably maybe commonly, like the flammulated owl, which are just hard to see because they're tiny. They spend the day in cavities in trees, and at night they're just a small dark shape that we don't get off it out in the forest in the middle of the night.
Gotcha. Right.
So,
Right. I was going to say, and I've never seen these in person, but I know that you and a couple of my coworkers took a trip earlier this year to do some studies, and they are quite small.
they are tiny, especially when you get the babies in their hand. You can fit 2 or 3 of them in the palm of your hand.
So wild. And they're adorable.
They are little puffballs. Yeah.
They're so cute. Yeah. And what were you guys doing on your trip out there to see?
We're working with a researcher, Dr. Marcus Mika, who's been studying this population along with other researchers for many, many years and using nest boxes to look at population demographics, who's looking at their genealogy, if you will, and their survivorship, sometimes using some very nice high-end technology, some tiny GPS and geolocator units that allow us to they record where the bird's been, and then when we recapture the bird, we get to see what the migration was, because these are tiny owls that also migrate all the way down into central and southern Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're small but mighty.
Exactly, yeah.
Do some traveling. And where in Utah are these little flammulated owls?
Flammulated, yeah, it's a word you have to practice a couple times in front of the mirror. They're found mostly in the lower elevation forest, aspen and up forest. They don't typically open to spruce fir. That's a little bit too tall, and not exclusively conifers either.
And they'll just kind of make little burrowing holes in there or something.
Actually, they are what you call a secondary cavity nester, so they need somebody else to make them a nest hole, like a woodpecker.
Interesting. They're squatters.
Well, yeah, they're efficient there.
I appreciate that, yeah. So with these species, these different birds of prey that we have here, typically do most of them migrate, or do we have a lot that will stay here in Utah year-round?
We have a few that'll stay here year-round, but not that many. Most of our raptors do migrate, and some are extraordinary migrants, like this, the flammulated owl that flies to central Mexico, or the Swainson's hawk, which is probably our record-setting. They'll go all the way down to the Pampas of Chile.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in massive numbers. So most of our raptors do migrate. They're looking to escape the lack of prey and sometimes the cold. That isn't that big of a problem for raptors. They've got natural down coats, but the lack of food, that's the main issue. So, but there are some species that think of Utah, the harsh winter of Utah, as they're Florida. So we've got birds that are coming down to Utah to overwinter, like rough-legged hawks that breed up in the boreal forest, or in the Arctic rather.
Interesting. Okay. And so talk about how those types of birds, how do they survive our winters here?
Well, they're well adapted for cold, and their hunting techniques are also pretty well suited to the kinds of winter environments that we have. So they're still pulling out, mice and voles and sometimes rabbits and things from the winter habitats that have been just recently abandoned by the red-tailed hawks and the Swainson's hawks and the Ferruginous hawks that breed here.
Okay, so they can hunt in the snow and just they're kind of conditioned for all of that.
Yep.
With kind of the broad spectrum that we have of these different bird species, how do we manage them here within the division?
Well, we manage them much like we manage other species for the Division of Wildlife. We look to have healthy populations in every habitat where we'd expect to find them, based on their habitat preferences and life histories. And so that's a really good question, actually. It kind of implies that we should be out looking for them in all those places, too, which is a little bit different for non-game birds, since we don't have dedicated funding associated with that.
Sure.
We have to write grants and research proposals and get those funded so that we have the funds to go out and do the monitoring that lets us know how those populations are doing.
So as opposed to, you mean like the species that we're hunting, and we're using hunting license dollars and things that kind of help fund the management of those?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's a slightly different kind of work environment for us as managers, but we do use a lot of the same techniques. We do aerial counts and ground counts, and we use a lot of GPS technology as well these days. That's now getting small enough to put on birds. The kind of collar you put on an elk or a mule deer is a very different piece of technology than you put on a bird that's evolved to have hollow bones.
Sure. Sure.
Its weight limit is considerably different. So
Gotcha. And usually if we are GPS tracking, what does that look like? Is it usually just the little bands on the legs that we do with like geese and ducks and things like that?
we do some banding, but that banding is kind of a passive thing. So when you band a goose or a duck, typically you're not going to collect that band again until the bird's shot and that band's turned in. Because you don't hunt game these birds, we don't have any expectation that you're ever going to see that band again, probably, unless you're very, very lucky and recapture it at another banding site somewhere else. So when we use GPS technologies and things like that, we're trying to get these birds to either report them via satellite, if they're large enough to carry a backpack of that weight, which is about 8 grams. Currently, that's the smallest package that we can get a satellite transmitter into. And that's something like the size of a yellow-billed cuckoo or Bendire's thrasher, let's say.
We've mentioned that previously, that we've done little backpacks for like turkeys or sage grouse or whatever, but we'll also do those for some of these smaller species. Okay.
And they're quite a bit more expensive. The smaller you want to make that thing, the more expensive it gets. So some of those can be, $4,000 to $8,000.
Oh wow!
Each,
for one.
for each
Okay.
one, correct.
Oh
Yeah.
wow, that is expensive. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Okay. And I know there's like obviously some federal surveys that are done as well. The Christmas bird count, is that something that we participate in as well with different agencies to try and collect data on some of these different bird species?
Sure. Birds are great in the sense they're beautiful, charismatic, colorful things that people like to go and see. And so a lot of the data that we use to actually manage birds comes from these volunteer surveys, these citizen or community science surveys that some of them have been going on since the turn of the century, like the Christmas bird count.
Yeah.
It was started in like 1901, I think. And also the breeding bird survey is also a largely volunteer-driven survey that's done during the breeding season. And that's also, it's a road-based survey that we use data to derive these long-term trends. That's been going on since 1967.
That's awesome. So people, anybody that's interested can help out with getting some of this data.
Yep. There's lots of different ways to participate. There's also, in the modern version, is eBird as well, where people are out birding, just bird watching, and they say, I want to let people know that I've seen these 5 species at this place at this time. There's an app now for a phone that you can use to record all of your information. So you're turning your passion into data.
That's awesome.
And that can be very, very useful in the aggregate, in the totality of it.
That's awesome. That's very cool that people can help assist some of these efforts too.
You bet.
Switching gears, with some of these birds of prey, a lot of times we'll get questions or, I know that we kind of help manage falconry here in the state of Utah. And I know that's kind of more of a niche sport among hunters. Talk to us about what falconry is. Like, how does that work?
Sure. Falconry is kind of a fascinating historic sport. It's been practiced, I think, on every continent, often for centuries. And there are many traditions and many long-standing sort of cultures, I guess you'd say, around falconry. So the sport of falconry is many things in some ways. How it's practiced in North America, it's very much of a mentorship. So it takes a long time to become a master falconer, like a minimum of 8 years. And you have to work through an apprenticeship process. But certified falconers are able to basically capture wild raptors and then train them to be used as in a sense, a weapon type for other wild species like rabbits and waterfowl.
I was about to say, and the image that usually comes to mind for me and maybe most people is like when you've seen on movies, in like ancient Mongolia, and some guy's got a hawk on his arm or whatever. And so that's kind of the concept, right? Is that you're training these birds to help you hunt.
Yep. Yeah, it's very much of a cooperation and a relationship that's built up. It's not something that's undertaken lightly. It's more of a lifestyle than a sport, I would say. It's consuming, and when done well, it's really very intense.
That's really interesting. So, and how long does it usually take to train one of these birds that somebody catches in the wild?
That will depend a lot on the age and species of the bird, as well as maybe somewhat of how frequently the falconer is able to interact with the bird as well. It's not uncommon for birds to be captured around this time of year in the fall. You get a passage bird, and then train it, fly it over the winter, and then release it again in the spring. Sort of a catch and release, if you will. But
okay. But they train the bird so well that it like comes back to them and kind of acknowledges them as, acknowledges that relationship.
Yes, but the trick is to not do it so thoroughly that you imprint the bird and it forgets to be a bird and tries to be a human. And that's where the trick is one of the balance points.
Interesting. Okay. So not the same as dog training.
No. No. You don't want them to be your forever friend. You want them to help you hunt and then have a releasable bird.
That's so interesting. See, and I didn't realize that because I was thinking that once you catch them and train them, you keep them forever.
Nope. Yeah.
Okay.
Typically not. They remain wildlife is, of course, a public ownership process. I mean, it's part of the North American model. So in a sense, falconers are borrowing raptors from the wild for a permitted period of time and then released again. Some they do keep, for decades even. Golden eagles can live, many, many decades.
So what's kind of the most common bird that's used in falconry?
Probably red-tailed hawks would be the number one. Number two might be kestrels. Those are the two birds that are most commonly used as introductory species, although kestrels are not a super easy species to get introduced to. They're a falcon. But red-tailed hawks are probably the number one most common species. Again, like I said, they're sort of behaviorally adaptable. They hunt well. They can hunt a variety of different prey types and a variety of different climates.
What are kind of the main thing that people are targeting? Is it usually rabbits that when they're using these birds to hunt?
Yeah, it depends on the species again. So if you've got a merlin, you're probably going after starlings around some of the agricultural areas. In the wintertime is a popular sport for that. Peregrines might be going after pigeons. Red-tails, you could be going after rabbits, and peregrines you can also take waterfowl as well.
Interesting.
You can hunt ducks.
With another bird. That's so interesting to me. If somebody, hears about this, they're listening to this episode and they think, that's really cool. That's something I'd like to get into. How does somebody go about doing that here locally in Utah?
Well, there's a lot of information on our website for apprentices who want to get started, and that's all. It's also a fairly regulated sport, so there's a fair number of rules to kind of attend to as well. That would be a good place to get familiar with that. There's some online social media kind of groups that are focused on Utah falconry. That's a good place to get some information, make connections. And if you want to see the sport practiced, at least during COVID times, I'm not sure exactly what's going to still happen, but typically over winter there are several meets or sky trials that are open to the public, and folks can go out and see the birds in action, which is really quite an amazing thing.
That's super cool. That's awesome. Where are those usually held, or does it vary all across the state?
It varies. It'll be announced, and it's never close to a town.
Okay, that
You're
makes
trying
sense.
to avoid things that birds can fly into. So.
That makes sense.
Yep.
That's super cool. So of kind of the bird species that we've talked about today, are there any that, these raptor species that are endangered or currently threatened?
Yeah, that's another full session topic. The only currently listed, Endangered Species Act listed species is the Mexican spotted owl in Utah. Both the bald eagle and the peregrine falcon were listed, but they've reached their population recovery goals and have been delisted.
Oh, that's great.
Yep. Yeah. So they are definitely success stories as they have recovered from DDT in particular was a major threat for peregrines.
Okay, interesting. So what were some of the main causes of kind of their population decline?
It was thought at the time to be primarily related to overharvesting of timber in their breeding areas and the potential for catastrophic wildfire. Mexican spotted owls, breed primarily in these deep in canyon country. So these high elevation box ends of these as a red rock canyon country. So they're feeding on mostly pack rats and things like that.
Okay.
At night, and it's a pretty spare environment, but they need that upland, some of that upland forest litter as well. And those are what the main threats were deemed to be back in 2015 or so.
Okay, I see. And so some of these wildfires can have quite an impact on some of these species that rely on, a certain type of tree habitat or whatever. You
bet. Yeah, they really can. And we try and work with our fire managers to let them know, just in the same way we try and let them know about the cultural resources or other kinds of things that we can avoid hurting them while we're fighting fire. That's really the best. It's going to be the best for everyone. So.
Gotcha. I was about to say, and I know we do a lot of habitat work as an agency too to try and prevent, some of these big catastrophic wildfires.
You bet.
Probably for that reason, yeah. So I know it's always kind of in the news, especially recently, California condors. And I know we have some, I guess, here in the state as well.
Sure. Yeah, we do. Actually, they are technically listed under the Endangered Species Act, but they are under what's called an experimental non-essential population, which allows Utah and Arizona in particular to have a population that doesn't carry regulatory burden along with it. So it's not they don't have critical habitat designated or anything like that. It's an experimental, non-essential population. And the main threat to condors is lead ammunition. So we've been working with sportsmen since 2009, I believe, to really encourage the use of non-lead ammunition in the home ranges of the condors. And that's really been a big help. We're starting to make some real progress there.
Yeah, talk about why lead is so, kind of why that lead ammo is so detrimental for these types of birds.
Sure. Well, condors, also considered a raptor, even though they pretty much only eat dead things.
Right.
It's
still meat.
It's still meat, sure, right. They're picking up lead fragments from bullets that have been used to hunt big game or sometimes livestock that have been left as well.
I see. So if somebody shoots an animal and then can't find the carcass,
or cleans it and leaves those remains.
Oh, like gut piles and things.
Right, and we very much want hunters to do exactly that, but we just like to have that be clean food and use non-lead shot and ammunition instead.
Gotcha.
So that when the condors do feed on those gut piles or whatever's left, that they're not getting poisoned. But we absolutely would like to see, the hunting out in the landscape.
Gotcha.
That's why the condors move to Utah and spend almost 90% of their time now in Utah is during the hunting seasons.
I see. And kind of where in Utah are they found? I know that there was a lot of news coverage for the chick that hatched in Zion National Park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the 1,000th bird.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Yeah, that was great fun, and it couldn't have been more visible too. I was there the day it actually fledged from Angel's Landing, and it basically, had a controlled flight, is a gracious word for it, down to the ground and was in easy scope distance of one of the bus stops on the Zion National
That's
Park
so cool.
tour, so it was a great spot.
You're telling the visitors, like, this is a big deal. Everybody just take a look.
I didn't have to say anything at all. The park staff had 3 full-time folks sitting with the scope, and they had placards. And
That's so cool.
They took good advantage of that situation. The condors are in Utah, spend most of their time near and around Zion National Park and that plateau, the Kolob Plateau there.
Okay.
Yep.
Because they like really high, kind of those rocky ledge areas. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they like to have places that are safe from predators because they're very bad. They're great flyers, great soarers, but they're terrible walkers.
Okay.
So they're looking for protection from ground predators and places where they can escape too quickly, like falling off a cliff for us. But for them, it's just a nice launch point.
Gotcha. That's awesome. I was going to say, I would love to see one in the wild someday. I know that Arizona will do some releases sometimes of their, captive raised birds. And so that would be really cool to see.
Down the Vermilion Cliffs just over the border there. We've gone down for that. It would be fun to take you out.
That's super cool. So we've kind of talked, we have our lead program and there's some other habitat type work that we're doing to try and help some of these species that, their populations have declined. What's something that just kind of the average person could do to maybe help some of these different, raptor species?
Sure. There are a number of things that people can do to help birds in general. I think there's an online resource for that. If you were able to Google the 3 billion birds, you'd find some of those resources quickly. And one of those things that would help raptors is marking windows in particular. We do have some window collisions with buildings. It's not a high threat for raptors, but it does happen.
Oh, interesting. So like maybe putting something in your windows so they know there's glass.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. One other thing, though, is maybe just slowing down a bit when driving, and you see raptors on either fence posts near the highway or even standing on the roadway beside, let's say, an old roadkill or something. If they're feeding there, they're quite vulnerable to getting struck by cars as they try and take off, especially if they've been feeding and are heavy.
They're like us after a Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, exactly.
You move a little slower.
That's exactly right. And they can get clipped. That's where we probably kill most of our raptors in Utah is with our cars.
That's crazy. See, and that's something I didn't even know until just very recently. I had no idea that many of these types of birds are hit that way, with cars.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one of the big ways. Another way is, another thing that people can do is actually, if they're using like rodent poisons, rodenticides, please follow the labels carefully and use only as much as you need to, and only when you've tried everything else. Rodenticides are a very potent poisons in the rodents, rats and mice and things, which no one really wants in their house or property. But
sure.
Some of the newer class of poisons are so potent they will easily kill raptors that take those mice and rats as they're moving away.
Gotcha. So it'll kill the rat, but then it's still
quite
got the
potent.
poison.
Yep.
It'll kill the bird too.
You
I
bet.
see. Okay. That's good to know. Yeah. Because I'm like everybody, I feel like birds are kind of a universally loved and appreciated species. So I think that's something that people want to know is like, how do we help? What are things to be aware of? Yeah. So I'm glad that you mentioned some of those resources. That's really helpful. Yeah. And I just thanks so much for coming on today. I think this has been really educational, at least for me. I don't know a lot about birds, and so this has been cool to learn about some of the different species that we have here locally, and just, kind of how to help them stay healthy as well. And as always, if you haven't yet, we'd love if you could subscribe to the Wild Podcast. We release a new episode on the third Tuesday of each month, and so we hope that you all will join us next month for some more wildlife stories.